Have you ever felt dismissed, as if your presence no longer held any value in the eyes of another? Whether in romance, friendship, or work, being ignored, being underestimated wounds us deeply. And in that wound, instinct drives us to act, to send more messages, to explain ourselves, to prove that we are still worthy. But what happens next? The more you try, the further you are pushed away. The more present you are, the more ordinary you seem. The hard truth is, that's entirely accurate. We believe that to reclaim their attention, we must do something to turn them around. Yet the truth is far simpler and far more profound. Stop. When you cease chasing, you rekindle the mystery, the worth, and the inner vitality they once sensed in you. This is where Stoicism enters, not as a tool to manipulate, but as a foundation to reverse the tide with dignity and tact. Now, let us explore how to do that, with restraint, silence, and the power within. 1. Don't chase. Let them feel your absence. We're often raised in a world that praises pursuit. Go after what you want. If you want a job, apply for it. If you want success, outwork everyone. And if you want to keep someone in your life, prove you're worth it. But in relationships, especially when someone is drifting away, this mindset becomes a trap. In moments when emotion overrides reason, we fall into the spiral of chasing. Endless texts, calls, trying every way to remain present in their life. Each action driven by the hope that they'll recognize our sincerity and return. But reality often unfolds the opposite way. The more you pursue, the further you push them. The more visible you become, the more your value fades. This stems from a fundamental truth of human psychology. What comes easily is rarely treasured. When you're always available, always responding, always waiting, you send an unspoken message. You have nothing better to do than orbit them. And to them, you cease to be an independent soul of worth. You become someone merely waiting to be noticed. In Stoicism, chasing emotion is a form of bondage. When you seek validation from others, you surrender control over your own life. One of the core tenets of this philosophy is simple. What lies outside your control should not govern your emotions. And the other person, their actions, feelings, and decisions are precisely that, beyond your control. So your task is not to prove anything. No explanations, no strategies to win them back. Step back and let them face the void left by your absence. That void will speak. When the texts stop coming, your presence vanishes from social media, and the usual responses fall silent. They begin to notice your presence is no longer a given. Absence has a strange power. It sharpens what was once taken for granted. While they were used to your constant presence, they felt no need to hold on. But when you withdraw, without blame, anger, or desperation, just a complete retreat, it sends a subtle tremor through their mind. They begin to wonder, why no reaction? Why did they disappear? And most importantly, did I lose something valuable without knowing it? The strength of absence lies in forcing others to confront the consequences of their choices. While you were still around, they could ignore you without consequence. But once you're gone, there is no longer a stable energy to absorb their emotions. And that silence turns them inward, making them reflect on your place in their life. What matters here is consistency. Withdrawal is not a short-term tactic. If you disappear for a few days, but then send a check-in text or look for ways to reappear, you destroy the very effect you are building. They'll see that you are still playing the game. And once they see that, the silent power of absence vanishes. But if you remain firm in your decision not to chase, you communicate something powerful. I hold enough worth not to beg for anyone's attention. That not only forces others to reflect, it also redefines how you see yourself as someone who knows they deserve respect without needing to cling to be chosen. However, let's be clear. Refusing to chase doesn't mean fondly hoping they'll come back. The goal isn't to manipulate emotions. The goal is to reclaim your sovereignty, a core principle of Stoic life. Only when you stop depending on someone else's behavior do you become truly free. And in that freedom, you can focus on what matters most: rebuilding yourself. In your absence, you don't wait idly. You work. You train. You read. You restore your body and mind. You reconnect with your passions. And as you return fully to your own life, no longer obsessed with what they think or do, you realize you no longer need them to feel whole. And that wholeness, that creates self-containment, what makes others start paying attention. Conversely, if you continue chasing, texting, looking for reasons to reach out, and remain present, you degrade yourself in their eyes. They stop needing you because you're always there. And what is always there loses allure. You become predictable, lose your mystery, and more importantly, lose their respect. The truth is simple, though hard to accept. People often begin to value you only fully when you are no longer around. And if they feel no loss in your departure, then perhaps your presence was never valued, but merely tolerated. That's why silence, when paired with self-growth and unwavering action, becomes a quietive but powerful force. It isn't apathy, nor is it a tactic. It's a declaration from someone who knows their worth and is willing to walk away from anything that no longer serves their well-being. And only when you truly stop, not from hope, not from strategy, but for peace of mind, do they begin to feel what's truly been lost. 2. Mastering emotion. The first step toward true power. In every moment of rejection, abandonment, or emotional pain caused by others, our feelings surge like a violent wave. Anger, anxiety, confusion, sorrow, they all arise instinctively as part of our survival mechanism. And that is inevitable. However, the point is not that emotion arises, but how we respond to it. That response is what defines our inner strength. Stoicism teaches that emotion itself is never the problem. The problem begins when we allow emotion to govern our actions. When someone turns away, betrays us, or ignores us, the pain comes immediately. But if we react impulsively, sending accusatory messages, begging, displaying our hurt or BCC, we surrender our self-control into their hands. The ability to recognize emotion is the first step to mastering it. When a feeling surfaces, we must pause, not speak, not act, but simply observe. I feel sad. I feel hurt. I feel angry. Naming the emotion creates space between the one who observes and the emotion being experienced. That space is the foundation of inner strength. We often react unconsciously because we're unfamiliar with sitting still with our feelings. When hurt, we act to soothe the pain. But no action can truly soothe an emotion that hasn't been understood. The more people act from pain, the more mistakes they make, messages that shouldn't be sent, words that shouldn't be said, choices that lead to later regret. And all of it stems from a loss of emotional control. Stoicism does not promote suppression or denial of emotions. It teaches control over our reactions to them. Emotions are temporary, but the consequences of how we respond can be permanent. Remaining calm in anger or silent in pain is not a sign of numbness, but of a mind trained not to be ruled by what lies outside itself. When someone treats you poorly, you cannot control their behavior, but you can always control your response. That means reclaiming dominion over your inner life. And one who masters their inner world is not easily manipulated by emotional games or mind tricks from others. Mastering emotion is not a one-time act, but a continual practice repeated daily. It begins with small things, noticing when you are overly anxious, when you seek reassurance from others, when you feel wounded by a careless gesture. Every time you notice is a step closer to inner freedom. Stoicism emphasizes a sharp distinction between what lies within our control and what does not. Emotions arise from circumstance, what others say, how they behave, what happens around us, and these are outside our control. But how we think about those events, how we interpret and respond to them, is entirely up to us. That's the boundary between instinctive reaction and intentional choice. For example, if someone you once trusted suddenly stops communicating, you may feel hurt and abandoned. But if you respond by calling, texting repeatedly, or posting cryptic messages online, you've let emotion guide your behavior. On the other hand, if you acknowledge the emotion, allow it to be there, and choose to remain composed, you are practicing real power, the power of self-possession. The ability to resist immediate emotional reaction is not weakness. It is the mark of inner depth. Because holding stillness amid a storm requires discipline and strength far beyond the ordinary. And that is what sets you apart. Emotional mastery is also the foundation of healthy boundaries. When emotions do not control behavior, you can make decisions based on reason. You don't forgive someone just because you fear losing them, nor do you lash out merely from a bruised ego. You act not from momentary feelings, but from the core values you are committed to uphold. When someone begins to drift away or withdraws, emotional turbulence is inevitable. One day you may feel fine, the next day empty and tempted to reach out. But in those moments of wavering, emotional mastery determines who you are in their eyes and in your own. You can respond as you always have: impulsive, emotional, predictable. Or you can respond as someone spiritually mature, steady, lucid, grounded. Stoicism doesn't demand you become emotionless. It poses one simple question: do you want to be led by your emotions, or do you want to lead them? If you choose the latter, you not only gain control over yourself, you reclaim authority in every relationship. People often say, the strong don't need to show strength. Likewise, those who truly control their emotions have nothing to prove. They don't need to shout, ridiculate, or explain. Their silence speaks loudest. When emotions no longer control you, others no longer control you either. And in that moment, you enter a state of freedom, where you're no longer a victim of circumstance, but the master of your own inner experience. 3. The no-contact strategy isn't for manipulation. It's for renewal. The no-contact strategy is often misunderstood as a psychological tactic meant to make someone anxious, regretful, and returned. However, in the spirit of Stoicism, this strategy isn't about inducing a sense of lack in the other person. It's about reclaiming inner control. The goal isn't to change someone else, but to reconnect with oneself after a broken, strained, or unhealthy relationship. When a relationship falls apart, human instinct seeks explanation, clarity, a confirmation that we weren't wrong, that we still matter. That's why many feel the urge to text, call, or maintain some form of presence in the other person's life, even through social media. These actions offer temporary relief, but drag us deeper into emotional dependency. And that dependency delays or even disrupts the healing processes. The no-contact strategy emerges as a quiet declaration. You are stepping back not from weakness, but because you need space to recover. This space doesn't just sever the loop of emotional reactivity. It allows you to redefine your identity, your values, and your direction in life, free from the energy of the other person. From a Stoic viewpoint, other people's behavior lies beyond our control. So trying to change their feelings, their decisions, or bring them back is a misplaced investment in the uncontrollable. In contrast, choosing to cease all contact is a redirection of attention inward, toward what you can influence, impede, and command. To practice no contact means stopping all forms of communication. No calls, no texts, no watching their stories, no comments, no sending messages through others, and most importantly, no creating excuses for indirect interaction. Complete silence creates an emotional blank space, a gap that was once filled with worry, monitoring, and constant reaction. This space may initially feel uncomfortable, especially for those used to deep emotional attachment, but it is precisely this space that becomes the foundation for rebuilding mental independence. One of the most profound effects of no contact is breaking the stimulus-response cycle, common in toxic relationships. Often, there's a familiar pattern. They hurt you. You react. You feel guilty. And then you reach out again. This loop corrodes self-respect and blurs the line between genuine emotion and learned dependence. When you go no contact, that cycle ends. You stop reacting. You stop emitting neediness. And this is when your nervous system begins to recalibrate toward balance. Beyond the psychological, no contact is also an act of emotional discipline, something Stoicism deeply values. Because emotions don't always tell the truth. Sometimes you miss them and believe they're the only source of happiness. But such thoughts come from a source not yet steady. Only by distancing yourself from their influence can you observe your feelings objectively. And once the mind quiets, you see more clearly what truly matters and what was only illusion. A crucial principle in practicing no contact is releasing the desire for an outcome. If you do it merely hoping they'll realize your worth and return, then you're still anchored to their behavior. Precisely what Stoicism warns against. No contact only fulfills its purpose when it stems from a desire to heal, grow, and realign your value, regardless of whether they return or not. Cutting contact not only supports your recovery, it creates the silence needed for the other person to face the consequences of their actions. As you stop responding, stop showing up, stop supplying emotional energy, they are forced to confront the void and to reflect. That reflection is not something you imposed. It arises naturally from the shift in the relational energy. Still, whether they recognize this or not, whether they respond or not, it's no longer your concern, because the focus has returned to you. A common mistake in no contact is monitoring their reaction, checking their posts, seeing if they texted, asking others about them. This reveals lingering attachment to results, and any form of attachment weakens the entire process of internal rebirth. Let your silence be absolute, unconditional. That is the only path to full restoration. As time passes, and if they returned, you will face them from an entirely different place, a place of clarity, steadiness, and emotional sovereignty. And if they don't return, you've lost nothing, because what you regained is worth far more, yourself. In short, no contact is not a trick to make someone regret. It is a courageous decision to step out of the emotional spiral, reclaim your life, and rebuild a stable inner foundation. Not to bring someone else back, but to return to the free, conscious self you were always meant to be. 4. Become the version of yourself you deeply respect. When a relationship ends or someone leaves you, the common reaction is to focus on how to make them come back. That line of thinking often leads us away from what matters most: our own growth. Stoicism doesn't concern itself with whether you can change others. Instead, it insists that the only path to freedom and happiness is to become a better version of yourself, one you can truly respect. Respect does not come from praise, nor is it the result of flashy achievements. It comes from a deep sense that you are living in alignment with your values, that your actions match the ideals you profess. And reaching that state requires self-discipline, physically, mentally, and morally. When you are no longer driven by the pursuit of emotional validation from others, a void emerges. At first, that void may feel like emptiness, but if used correctly, it becomes the foundation for inner rebirth. Instead of obsessing over, what are they thinking, you begin to ask, who am I really, and who do I want to become? That question is the starting point on the path to becoming someone worthy of your own admiration. From a Stoic perspective, what elevates a person is not the circumstances they face, but how they respond and adapt to them. Someone abandoned can wallow in self-pity, or they can transform that pain into fuel to rebuild themselves with strength, discipline, and depth. Becoming a better version of yourself doesn't happen overnight. It's a process that requires persistence and consistency. Start with the small things. Develop the habit of sleeping early, waking early, eating clean, exercising, and reading daily. These seemingly simple acts form the groundwork for a deep inner confidence, a confidence not built on external approval, but on the clarity that you are living with purpose, discipline, and direction. Beyond the physical, the mind must also be trained. Taking time to reflect, journal, meditate, or learn to manage your thoughts helps you grow sharper in reasoning and calmer in emotion. A trained mind doesn't sway with the words or actions of others. And that very steadiness is what makes others sense something has changed. Not because you try to impress, but because your inner energy has shifted. During this journey, it is essential to detach from the need for recognition. When you act out of a desire to be noticed or praised, you are still enslaved by others' eyes. But when you pursue growth, simply because you refuse to live in weakness any longer. You touch the core of Stoic strength, to live by principle, not by approval. A version of yourself that earns your own respect is someone who can face themselves. No excuses, no denial, no blame. They know their strengths and weaknesses. They do not avoid pain but confront it, to understand the nature of loss and from it extract deeper lessons. It is this honesty with oneself that fosters true maturity, not hollow affirmations. To cultivate such a version, you must also reestablish your core values. These may be discipline, integrity, honesty, compassion, or composure. Each day, you act from those values, not needing anyone to see, not needing anyone to applaud. And each time you do, you affirm to yourself, I'm living in alignment with who I've chosen to be. As you persist in living by your ideals, something powerful happens. You begin to see others differently. You are no longer drawn to those who once hurt you, because now you function at a different level of awareness. You understand that your worth is not in another's hands, and so you no longer chase what is shallow or easy. This maturity makes you magnetic, not through words or appearance, but through the quiet energy of stability and self-command. A person living by their values doesn't rush to forgive, nor do they rush back into an unhealed relationship. They establish boundaries, not to retaliate, but to protect the version of themselves they've worked so hard to build. That self-respect makes them more selective about who is allowed into their life. The ultimate outcome of this journey is not just a new image or a more successful career. It is a completely different way of being, where you feel at peace inside, unafraid of silence, no longer needing anyone to confirm your worth. At that point, whether someone returns or not, no longer matters. And if they do return, you will receive or reject them from a place of strength, not desperation. In the end, becoming the version of yourself you deeply respect is not a short-term goal. It is a continuous journey, a path of intentional living, principled action, and conscious choice. On that path, every step is a testament to the fact that you are moving closer to the kind of person who can look in the mirror and say, I am proud of who I am. 5. When they return, you are no longer the same. When someone who once left you returns, it's not uncommon. It might be an unexpected message after a long silence, a late-night phone call, an expression of regret, or an apology coupled with a desire to reconnect. For many, that moment can stir deep emotions, joy, commotion, even a longing to return to what once was. But for someone who has walked the path of healing and inner growth, their return is no longer the center of everything. Stoicism emphasizes emotional self-mastery and living by reason rather than impulse. Once you've truly embraced these principles, you're no longer the same person. The one who feared abandonment, who panicked in silence, who rushed to keep someone from leaving. Now, you approach their return with a completely different mindset, calm, clear, and unbound. Their return may be driven by many reasons. Perhaps they felt the emptiness after you withdrew. Perhaps they experienced loss elsewhere and began to miss the stability you once brought. Or maybe they simply sensed a shift in your energy, calm, self-possessed, no longer yearning. Whatever the reason, the most important truth remains. You have changed. This change is not just external or behavioral. It is a shift at the root of your thinking. where your worth is no longer defined by someone else's gaze. You now understand that another's presence cannot dictate your emotions, your peace, or your life's direction. And that's why you no longer respond the way you once did when they return. In such moments, someone who has not yet mastered their emotions can easily be swept away by nostalgia. They may see the return as a chance to start over, as a sign that they are finally good enough to be seen. But for someone who has matured through an inner journey, their return is merely a data point, not a validation and not a reward. When you are no longer the same, you meet the reunion from a different vantage point. Instead of rushing forward emotionally, you take a step back to observe and assess. You don't let the past blur the present. You ask yourself, is this return born from real change, or just a response to emptiness? Has this person come to truly value you, or are they merely seeking temporary comfort? Stoicism teaches that all relationships must be examined through the lens of reason. If a relationship once caused you pain, their return does not erase what happened. You hold no resentment, but neither do you forget the lessons. And the greatest of those lessons is this: your worth should never be bargained for someone's presence. When someone has cultivated true self-control, they don't need words to prove their transformation. Their energy, their composure, their response speaks clearly. They don't overreact. They don't act cold to punish. They are simply different, no longer dependent on the relationship to feel whole. And this very difference forces the returning person to reevaluate your place in their life. The one who once walked away may come to see that this version of you is no longer predictable, no longer blindly forgiving, no longer susceptible to emotional sway or empty promises. They will feel the boundaries you've now drawn. These boundaries are not about punishment. They exist to protect what you've worked so hard to rebuild: your self-respect, your balances, your inner peace. In that moment of reunion, your difference shows in how you communicate. You don't have to act aloof or superior, but you speak with intention. No over-explaining, no emotional flooding, no eagerness. You allow them to speak, to reveal their intentions, and you listen with both reason and instinct. If things feel unclear, you don't rush to respond. You are no longer driven by the need to resolve emotions on impulse. If they truly wish to reconnect, they must earn the right to meet this new version of you. And to do that, they must demonstrate real change, not in words alone, but in consistent action, responsibility, and respect for your boundaries. If not, you are ready to move on, without anger, without regret, just a quiet decision to leave behind what no longer fits. Someone who has changed no longer makes decisions out of loneliness. They stay or leave based on value, compatibility, and mutual respect. Another's return cannot shake them, for their mind no longer seeks to be filled from the outside. And when one can fill their own life from within, they will never trade freedom and dignity to hold on to anyone. The true conclusion of this journey does not lie in whether or not you accept their return. It lies in the fact that you can look at them, look at the old story, and say with honesty to yourself, I am no longer who I was, and I will not go back down that path just because of a moment of weakness. 6. Set boundaries, not to control them, but to protect yourself. In relationships, Whether romantic, friendly, familial, or professional, boundaries are often misunderstood. Many view them as signs of distance, rigidity, or coldness. In reality, boundaries are essential to protect personal values and sustain healthy interaction with others. In the Stoic spirit, setting boundaries is not about controlling others. It is an act of self-governance, preserving one's inner peace. Boundaries are the limits you defined to determine what is acceptable and what is not. They may concern time, communication style, respect, or emotional availability. A person without clear boundaries is easily swept into the emotional chaos of others, vulnerable to harm, and often left emotionally exhausted in relationships. In contrast, someone with boundaries knows what is good for them and how to safeguard it. From a Stoic perspective, every person is responsible for their inner life. No one else can be held accountable for your emotions, energy, or mental state. Therefore, setting boundaries is part of personal responsibility, like protecting a garden from external damage. Without a fence, anyone can enter, cause harm, or take what you've worked hard to cultivate. Boundaries are not tools to control someone's behavior. They are not meant to force others to act a certain way. Rather, boundaries clearly state that if an action crosses the line, you will step back or change how you engage. You do not demand that others change, but you choose how to respond in order to honor your values. For example, if you were in a relationship where the other person was consistently distant, only reaching out when they needed something, or disappearing without explanation, you have the right to set a boundary by saying, "I cannot maintain a connection with someone who does not respect my presence." If the behavior continues, you withdraw, not out of anger, not to retaliate, but to protect the emotional stability you've worked hard to build. When someone returns after having left you, resetting boundaries becomes even more important. At this point, you are no longer in the same position. You are no longer the one willing to accept anything just to keep them around. You've been through healing, rebuilt yourself, and learned the value of your self-worth. As such, you need clear boundaries to ensure that any renewed relationship does not undo what you've rebuilt. Setting boundaries also keeps you from falling into cycles of repeated behavior. Many relationships become stuck in loops due to the absence of clear limits. One person disrespects you, you stay silent or forgive, and the pattern repeats. A boundary breaks that cycle. It is the moment you declare, "I understand my worth, and I will not allow this behavior to continue." Establishing boundaries does not require anger or threats. On the contrary, calm and firmness are key. You don't need to over-explain. You don't need to make anyone feel guilty. You only need to clarify what you accept and what you do not. If they respect that line, the relationship can grow. If not, stepping away is necessary to maintain personal integrity. Self-awareness is essential in the boundary setting. You must know what hurts you, what makes you feel violated or disconnected from yourself. These feelings are signals alerting you that your limits are being tested. Once recognized, you can respond intentionally rather than react emotionally. Stoicism prizes rational response over impulsive reaction. Setting boundaries is a concrete example of that conscious choice. Instead of severing ties in anger, you choose to define a line. Instead of allowing someone to dictate your emotional state, you create enough distance to remain yourself, calm, rational, and uncued by external chaos. Boundaries are not walls of isolation. They are controlled gates. You decide who may enter, under what conditions, and you reserve the right to close the door when safety is compromised. A person who respects you will also respect your boundaries. And a healthy relationship is built on clarity, transparency, and mutual agreement, not on vagueness or tolerance of harm. When you set boundaries, you also help others understand how to interact with you respectfully and effectively. This not only reduces misunderstandings, but elevates the quality of communication. A relationship without boundaries soon becomes a space filled with hurt, fatigue, and disappointment. Conversely, when boundaries are honored, both individuals can grow without violating each other. Ultimately, maintaining boundaries is a repeated act, not a one-time declaration. You must be consistent in word and action. If you say you won't tolerate disrespect, but remain when mistreated, you nullify that boundary. Consistency is the proof that your boundaries are real, not just words. 7. Turn pain into power, not into a wound that bleeds forever. In life, no one escapes deep hurt. It may come from the collapse of a relationship once filled with hope, the betrayal of someone trusted, or the sealant forgetting by someone who once felt close. Pain arises as a natural consequence of loss, and in such moments, being overwhelmed by negative emotions is entirely understandable. Yet what matters is not where the pain comes from, but how each person faces, processes, and transforms it. Stoicism does not encourage people to ignore pain or pretend to be strong. On the contrary, it teaches us to face reality, confront our emotions, and accept them as part of the growth process. He says, pain is not the enemy. It is a messenger, signaling that something must be re-examined, adjusted, or changed. When a person chooses to dwell endlessly in their hurt, pain becomes a lingering wound. It may no longer bleed as it did at first, but it seeps quietly, eroding confidence, positivity, and self-trust. Those who carry such wounds often live on guard, pessimistic, or easily shaken by even the smallest outside force. They replay old memories, blame themselves or others, and gradually become closed off, defensive, or suspicious of everything. Stoicism does not deny pain, but it does not allow pain to rule a life. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" the Stoic-minded person asks, "What can I learn from this, and how can I use it to become stronger?" The shift from victimhood to student is the key that allows one to stop bleeding inwardly. Turning pain into power does not mean forcing yourself to move on immediately. It is a process that requires time, awareness, and the ability to redirect energy. Pain contains a potent energy. If misdirected, it can destroy from within. But if guided wisely, it becomes fuel for transformation, sometimes even the spark for a life-defining shift. One practical way to transmute pain is to turn it into purposeful action. After a heartbreak, rather than remain stuck in regret, one can begin forming new positive habits. They might train the body to strengthen the mind, learn a new skill, focus on career goals, or invest in healthier relationships. Each intentional act born from pain creates a sense of progress. And that progress is the most effective medicine. Beyond action, directed reflection also plays a crucial role. Instead of spiraling into thoughts like, "I'm not good enough," or "I don't deserve love," the Stoic practitioner examines the event through reason. What was I expecting? Was that expectation realistic? What signs did I ignore along the way? What lesson can I extract to avoid repeating this? Such structured thinking leads to clarity, and from clarity emerges true growth. A key factor in transforming pain into strength is refusing to let it define your identity. Many carry their wounds as a self-label. They see themselves as the betrayed, the unloved, or the abandoned. From there, they begin viewing life through a victim's lens and unknowingly recreate situations that reopen the same wounds. Stoicism breaks this loop by reminding us, you are not your emotions, and you are not your past story. You are the one who chooses how to respond, here, now. The more a person focuses on becoming better through their pain, the less they are controlled by the past. They don't avoid it. They confront it. They don't blame. They take ownership. And it is this active stance that lets them discover meaning in even the most negative experience. A broken relationship might teach patience, listening, or self-respect. A betrayal might clarify boundaries, reshape trust, and remind us never to place our peace in someone else's hands. Each lesson drawn from pain is a step in awareness, and awareness is something no one can take away. When pain is truly transformed, there is no need to prove anything to the one who caused it. No need to return just to show how much I've changed. No need to retaliate or make others feel regret. At that point, motivation no longer comes from outside. It comes from within. The goal is not to impress anyone, but to live a life worth respecting, grounded in your values. Looking back, someone who has turned pain into strength will feel no regret. They know that without that experience, they wouldn't have become who they are today. And when others look at them, what earns respect is not that they were never hurt, but that despite the hurt, they kept walking with autonomy and resilience. 8. True magnetism comes from inner freedom. In modern society, magnetism is often confused with appearance, status, wealth, or self-presentation. The traits most visible to the eye are considered the weapons that make someone attractive in the eyes of others. Yet true magnetism, the kind that endures, defies explanation, and resonates deeply, doesn't lie in outward form or fleeting display. It stems from a single source: inner freedom. Inner freedom is the state in which one is no longer bound by the need for validation, no longer driven by impulsive emotion, and no longer living under the expectations of others. It is the steady calm within, the ability to remain grounded amid praise or blame, the strength to uphold personal values even when the world turns chaotic. Stoicism regards this as the foundation of a rightful life and the essence of true attraction. A person with inner freedom doesn't seek attention. They don't try to impress, nor do they fear being forgotten. They show up with stable energy, unassuming, yet undeniably felt. Precisely because they need nothing from others, they emit a distinct signal. They are complete, even in solitude. This draws others in, not to give them anything, but to understand how such serenity is possible. Unlike magnetism born from image or speech, the magnetism of inner freedom needs no display. It does not rely on saying the right words, acting the right way, or playing the right role. It emanates from an energetic steadiness, a state in which one lives in harmony with oneself, unbuoyed by the emotional currents of others. They don't overreact to rejection, don't result in attention, and don't crumble under misunderstanding. They stay anchored, and that makes them unmistakably different. In relationships, someone with inner freedom does not cling. They do not use relationships to validate their worth, and therefore, they love freely, without force, control, or jealousy. They give without calculating return, and if hurt, they withdraw quickly, without drama or escalation. The calmness with which they let go reveals the depth of their maturity. Stoicism teaches that we cannot control circumstances or the actions of others, but we can always govern our own responses. When one lives by this principle, they are no longer swayed by the presence or absence of anyone. They do not wait for a message, nor do they live in suspense for someone's reply. They are present in each moment, knowing that happiness is not granted by another, but born of contentment with oneself. And this lack of need creates a powerful allure, because it cannot be manipulated, bought, or easily lost. In reality, many are drawn to those they cannot easily grasp, not because that person plays games, but because they genuinely do not need anyone besides fighting them to feel whole. Inner freedom is not apathy or emotional detachment. It still cares, loves, and connects, but all from freedom, not from lack. They act not to fill a void, but to share an inner abundance. Inner freedom also reveals itself in how one faces loss. When a relationship ends, they do not collapse. They hurt, but they don't fall apart. They allow emotion to be felt, but never let it dictate behavior. They do not blame, retaliate, or try to win anyone back. Instead, they step back, observe, accept, and move on. That steadiness is more than strength. It is the mark of a liberated soul. A person with inner freedom has nothing to prove. They don't post photos to show someone they're happy. They don't try to flaunt a level up to a former lover. They grow in silence, live by their values, and let their actions speak. They understand that real validation arises from within, and if someone else can't see that, their value remains unchanged. In new relationships, the one with inner freedom does not easily fall into insecurity. They do not project hopes onto others to complete themselves. They are unhurried, not in search of perfection, but observant and clear-eyed. If someone aligns, they open their heart. If not, they let go. Not out of pride, but because they cherish their inner peace. Inner freedom is not innate. It is a practice. It arises from self-observation, disciplined response, living by principles rather than emotion, and releasing what cannot be controlled. The one who trains this daily enters a state where they no longer need to be attractive, because their authenticity is already compelling. In short, true magnetism does not come from appearance or performance. It comes from inner solidity, from a soul no longer lost in the pursuit of acceptance, from a person no longer governed by others' emotions. Such a person needs to do nothing to attract, because their quiet presence speaks volumes. Not because they try to shine, but because they are the light, shining from within. Looking back on the entire journey, from letting go of pursuit learning to master emotion, to practicing silence, developing oneself, setting boundaries, and living with inner freedom, I realized that Stoicism is not some abstract philosophy. It is practical, direct, and more necessary than ever in this emotionally chaotic modern world. I used to be someone who reacted instinctively. A message left unread could keep me awake all night. When someone walked away, I would spiral into weeks of self-blame and longing for their return. But ever since I began practicing Stoicism, simply by sitting with my emotions, resisting the urge to react, and repeatedly asking myself, is this within my control? I started to notice a change. Each day, I spend a few minutes journaling to check in with my inner state. When facing difficult situations in relationships, I no longer react immediately, but choose silence, observation, and only then, deliberate action. I no longer need anyone to validate my worth, because I'm building that worth from within. And strangely enough, it was precisely when I stopped trying to win someone back that they began to return. But by then, I had changed. I no longer needed them to feel whole. All I needed was to live according to reason, self-respect, and inner peace, as one walking the Stoic path of maturity. If this journey has resonated with some part of you, consider liking, subscribe, and turning on notifications so you won't miss the next videos. This is a space where we learn to master emotion, uphold our values, and live a life worthy of respect. Because in the end, the most powerful form of attraction does not come from trying to get someone back, but from the unwavering strength of no longer needing them. See you in the next video.